Hi everyone, this is Miss Forster. Yesterday we talked about life in two different types of communities. Today we will compare and contrast those communities. A Venn diagram helps us to recognize similarities and differences between two topics. We're going to be talking about urban and rural communities. So a Venn diagram is something that helps us say that everything in this circle talks about urban communities and everything in this circle talks about rural communities, and whatever we put where the circles overlap talks about both kinds of communities. So let's start looking. So here's our Venn diagram. And if I say the word city, does city seem like it would be on the urban side or the rural side? Or does the word city talk about both types of communities? Where would we write the word city? We would write it on the urban side because a city is the name of an area we would find in an urban community. What about the word country, like out in the country? Well, that would go on the rural side because the country is where we would see farms and forests and trees in a rural community. How about the word people? Where would we see people? Well, people would be in the middle where the circles overlap because people is a word that talks about both kinds of communities. We would see people in an urban community and we would see people in a rural community. How about tall buildings? Can you guess where we would write that? In an urban community, we would see tall buildings. How about farms? Where would we see farms? In a rural community, we would see farms. How about workers? People that are workers. Well, of course, we see workers in urban communities and rural communities. How about tractors? You think a tractor would drive down the city streets? No, a tractor would be something we'd see in a rural community. How about the metro trains, the trains that move people quickly? Metro trains we'd probably find in an urban community. What about cars? People driving cars? Well, we would see those in both, so it goes in the middle. How about schools? Where would we find schools? In both. Urban communities have schools and rural communities have schools. What about a zoo? Going to a zoo. Zoos we usually find in urban communities. What about cows? Where would we see cows? We'd probably see cows in a rural community. So this is how we organize the information about urban and rural communities. If it's a word that talks about things we might see in an urban community, it goes in this circle that we've labeled urban. And if we see something in a rural community, it goes in this circle that we have labeled rural. And if it goes with both, it goes in that middle part where the circles overlap. Today we're going to learn about the third type of community. It's not an urban community because there are not as many people and there are no tall buildings. It is not a rural community because there are not many farms. There are lots of stores and restaurants and lots of neighborhoods filled with houses. It is between the big city and the country farms. It is called a suburban community. And there we see a picture of a suburban community. See how it does not look like an urban community with tall, big buildings. And it does not look like a rural community with farms and lots of fields with the houses very, very spread out. In fact, the houses look pretty close together. Here's another picture of a suburban community. Look at how all of the houses form neighborhoods. In this picture, we see the suburban community is near the city. Do you see the city, the tall buildings in the background? The suburban communities surround the urban communities. Suburban communities are made up of lots of neighborhoods. Lots of people that live in the suburbs drive to the city. What is a suburban community? A suburban community also has houses, cars, and buildings. A suburban community is more spread out. There are usually homes with yards and garages in a suburban community. The suburbs have restaurants, stores, and fun activities nearby. And there we see another example. See the yards? Some of the yards have swimming pools. Some of the yards have a garage attached to the house or separate from the house. Suburban community. It is located near a big city. Suburbs are less crowded than cities because they have fewer people living on larger areas of land. Suburbs may be towns, villages, or small cities. They typically have their own government, fire department, and school system. Well, this activity we're not able to do, but you can use your imagination and pretend to draw a red circle around the rural community. Can you see in this picture where a rural community would be? Well, it would be up here, of course, with the farm and all the land. Draw a blue circle around the urban community. Well, this would be the urban community because look at the tall buildings, all close together. But what about a green circle around the suburban community? Well, here we can see the suburban community is between the rural and the urban. It's all that space in between filled with lots of neighborhoods and houses. On your seesaw activity, you're going to see lots of pictures that you will have to move to the correct place. And tell me, is it a picture of a rural community, a suburban community, or an urban community? Have fun.